Welcome to the next video in my RPG in a Box game logic scripting series. In this video, we're going to take a look at state management. And we're going to start very simply by looking at binary state management. And then the next part to this will be a two-parter, we'll take a look at slightly more advanced state management. Now, what is state management? So, states are basically how games track what state basically the game is in. So it could be whether a quest is completed, it could be whether an enemy is dead, it could be whether you've collected a certain key or an item, or it could be that you've typed the right password, it could be that you've, picked a certain dialogue option. Basically, it's a series of, it's a way for your game to track your actions, and then you can check those actions. So it's basically the backbone, the cornerstone of coding a game. So what we're going to cover in these two videos, this and part two, are very important to learn, and they're going to be the thing that you use the most. So if you can get your head around what we cover in part one and part two, you'll be off and running coding games. So let's go into how this all works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a door to my map. And the whole exercise in this video is we're going to make a functioning door. But in the process of making this door work, I'm going to be explaining to you the core principles that are at play in not only making this door work, but principles in general. The principles you're about to see will work with anything. Okay, so this, although I'm going to be showing you me doing this for a door, I'll also talk about afterwards how you just apply this same mindset that I'm about to sort of go over with the door to anything. Okay, any question you have, you'll be able to work your way through it yourself with the tools that you've been given in this video. Okay, so as I say, we're going to go over state management, and in this case we're going to do a very simple binary state management. Now, what does binary mean? It basically means it's one of two states, 1 or 0, okay, or true or false. Okay, so the great thing about a door is it can either be open or closed, and that's all we need to worry about. Okay, we just need to worry about whether it's open or whether it's closed. Okay, now this door is one I've taken from the asset library. So it already has an inbuilt couple of animations, one called open and one called close. So I'm already set to go for that. So assuming you've made your door and you've placed it down, what we also need to do is change the navigation around the door, especially for grid mode, because at the moment I can walk through the door, which I don't want. Navigation, interact. Okay, so we've got an interact line under our door. So we've placed our door, we've set up our navigation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make let's think about the goal that we're trying to achieve. When it comes to making anything in any programming language, let alone RPG in a box, okay, if you're starting out, is your first time ever making a game, I'm going to sort of talk you through a good workflow to go through, okay? So you need to think about what it is you're trying to achieve. So what is it I'm trying to achieve in this moment? I want to make this door open and close. So I want to make a working door, okay? So the first thing you need to understand is that while we've made a visible door, i.e. we've made the model and we've given it some animations and we've placed it on the map, the actual engine, RPG in a box, behind the scenes, doesn't know anything else about this object. As far as RPG in a box is concerned, it's just a 3D model, okay? It doesn't know that it opens, it doesn't know that it closes, it doesn't know that it's a door. It's just, in this moment in time, it's a static, inanimate thing, an entity that exists on the map, not doing anything, okay? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to get the door to start communicating to the engine not only what it is, but more importantly, what state it's currently in. Because we need to be able to track the state of this door. we can't tell the door to open and close if we don't know what state it's in already, right? So the first thing we need to do is set up what I'm going to refer to from now on as a signal, emitting a signal. I'm going to make this door emit a signal, okay? Just because it's easy to sort of visualize if I word it like that, even though it's not strictly speaking actually what you're doing, but think of it like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the door and I'm going to scroll down in the entity properties for the door to where it says custom properties. Now, I should mention before we go into this that in most programming languages, you'll use something called variables, and variables will allow you to store data that can change. And that's how you track things in any programming language, not just game design. But it's very useful for games because obviously games are entirely state-driven. So in the case of RPG in a Box, it has two types of variables and they're called properties. There is a third type, local variables, but they're really only used when you get into, really in-depth scripting, and we're not going to be covering those for a little while yet. But for the purposes of what we need right now, we've got two types of variables available to us: entity properties and global properties. Now, before we get into the one we're going to use, let me just talk about each one and what the difference is. Starting with global properties. Global properties can be found in Game Configuration, Global Properties section. And I've got one here, although I'm going to delete it because I don't need it. Global properties are it's a container for data, for values, that exists game-wide. So no matter what map you're on, this data is available to you, available to the engine to refer to, okay? And this data, this global property, is disconnected from any specific thing. It's just a value that exists in the game's memory. It's like a free-floating piece of data that's retrievable whenever you need it, okay? An entity property, however, is different. An entity property is a container of data that is stored on a specific entity. So it's not free-floating in and disconnected from anything. It's actually directly connected to a specific entity. And the difference is, as well as that, is if that entity is not in memory. So for example, if you're not in the same map as a particular entity, then that property isn't currently available to you. So in this case, I want to put an entity on this door because it makes more sense to me that if we want to track the state of a door, we should put that state on the door itself, not have it free floating around in game's memory, because it doesn't make any sense. Why would you disconnect it from the thing you're trying to check? We'll talk a little bit more in possibly part 2, global properties, so you can see when you might use those. But for this, our purposes, this makes more sense to make this data stored on the actual door itself. So I'm going to go to custom properties, which is where you do that for a specific entity. And I'm going to add a Boolean property. So I'm going to click Add Property, and I'm going to give it a name, Open, and it's going to start false. Now, Boolean is basically a data type. You can see we could also have had string or number. We're going to just worry about Boolean in this video. Boolean is a data type that's either true or false, only one or the other. If it's not false, then it must be true. And if it's not true, then it must be false. It can only ever be one of those two things. So it's a great thing to use for something that can only have two states, like a door, open or closed. So in this case, by setting up a property where the name is open and the value is false, that's the same as saying open or closed. Because if open is false, then close must be true. And likewise, if close is false, then open must be true. Okay, so we can use this Boolean property to track the state of this door. Now, because my door, as you can see on the map editor, starts closed, I've created a property that says open false. because that makes sense. It's not open, so open is false. Now, another way I could have approached this is I could call this close, and I could change that to true. And again, that would be valid because close is true. It is closed. However, I am going to call it open false just because that's the way I like to do it. There's no right or wrong way to how you set these, but you do have to make sure that they are correct for the initial setting. So if my door was to start open, that would need to be true. Okay. Otherwise, your game would be out of sync. Yeah. So what we've now done by creating this is we've essentially set up a signal on this door. This door is like a radio now. It's emitting a signal to the engine. And that signal is just repeating over and over again, open, false, open, false, open, false. Now, that doesn't by itself mean anything to RPG in a box. It doesn't suddenly understand, oh, you're a door, are you? Because open is false. No, it doesn't suddenly magically make a door work or make RPG in a box understand that it's a door. But what it has done is it means that this door is now, this object, this entity, is now emitting a signal. And in this case, the signal is open, false, open, false, open, false. And so what we as the developer are going to do is we are going to interpret that signal the way we want it to be interpreted. And we do that by writing scripts that interpret that signal the way it should be interpreted for a door. Okay? So what do we want to do? Well, let's start first and foremost, before we get into actually scripting the door, let's talk about what we can do with the signal. So there's 3 things you can do when it comes to coding game logic, or in this case, game states. You need to create the signal, the state, and then you check the state and change or update the state. So let's start with the next one, which is how do you check the state? So we've got this signal that's emitting now on the door saying close true or open false over and over again. How do we actually get the game to check what that signal is? Well, let's do that with the tile. Now, before we do that, I'm going to select the door and I'm going to scroll up to the very top of its properties and see here where it says Entity ID. This is a very important field. It's probably one of the most important fields, text boxes in this entire list of properties, especially if you're going to script for this entity. If you like these walls, for example, these are just static objects, so they don't need to have an ID. But because I'm about to write a script for this door and I need it to do something, you need to give it an ID, because entity IDs are how the script language knows what object or entity you're referring to. So if I call this door 1, you'll notice when I click off, this little tag icon will appear. That's how you know that this thing, whatever it is, has an entity ID. So if you don't see this, make sure you obviously got your markers on, because that would be another way why you don't see it. But as long as markers are on, if you don't see this purple tag over the item that you wish to have with an ID, then it means that when you select it, you either put it in the wrong place, like maybe the name instead, which will be wrong, or this just didn't get saved for whatever reason, so retype it again. But as long as it has this tag, and as long as it's got this ID, then any scripts can now refer to this specific door by this ID, okay? So we're going to use that in our check that we're about to write, because we want to check the signal that's coming off of this door. And in order to do that, we need our script to know which door is the one emitting the signal. So what we're going to do is select this tile, the one just in front of the door. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to scripting. Actually, I'm not going to do it this way. I was going to do it via the shortcut here, but then you'd have to type. And if you're a complete beginner, you probably want to see the visual script editor. So I'm going to make these as actual scripts. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a evaluate condition. And what evaluate condition does is it allows you to check things and do different things depending on if a condition is this or that or something else. So in our case, we're doing a very simple binary state. So what do we want to check? Well, we want to check an entity property. So we're going to click entity property, and then we're going to say equals, or in my case, I'm going to say does not equal. Actually, no, I'll keep it simple. We're going to say equals, and then we're going to say Boolean, and you can then click up here and make some changes. So see where it says entity? In quotation marks, it says ID. You need to change that to door 1. That's the name of the ID for the door that we placed on the map. Okay, so now this condition knows which entity we're referring to. Ah, you're referring to door 1, that door that's placed on the map in between those walls. Then you have dot property. So this is where you refer to the entity property. And then in speech marks, you have prop name. You're going to change that text to the name of the property that you created on the door. So in my case, open. And then we want to say, does it equal false in my case? Okay, and then click OK. So that's how you create a condition that checks for a signal that's on an entity. It's the entity by its ID, and then the property for the signal name, and then in this case, we're checking if it equals false. Now, it starts false, because if we go to the door again and look at the signal I set up, the property, open is false to begin with. So this is going to be valid to begin with. When this script runs, this is actually going to be the case. So what we can do now is decide what we want to have happen. I'm just going to simply have a display message appear if that's true. So I'm going to disconnect it because that's in the wrong one. And I'm going to connect this dot to this dot. That basically means that if this is the case, then it's going to do this. And what we wanted to say here is the door is closed, because the door is closed. If this is not open, then the door should be closed. And you can see that here in the box site code underneath the Visual Script Editor. You should see the text. So if entity door 1 property open is false, then display message the door is closed. Okay, and then we'll just copy this, pop that down there, and then we'll drag from the else dot to the yellow dot, let go, and that will add an else here, and then we can say the door is open. And we'll click save. And I've just realized I've made that the startup script, which, whoops. So we'll undo that in a minute. Let me just do a save as, and I'll call this door check. And let me just try and undo. So here we have our door check script. So what we've basically made is a signal checker. So it's going to check the signal on this entity, which to begin with, it's going to constantly be saying open, false, open, false, open, false. So this is going to be valid. So it's then going to do this, and it's going to say the door is closed. And it's going to keep doing that until this signal is not false. Now, at the moment, we haven't set that up. So our game is just going to keep saying the door is closed over and over and over again, because there's no way currently to make it open. Okay. But the point is, this is how you check what a signal is. So far, we've done 2 steps of the 3-step process. We've created a signal on the door that we can look for, and we've made a script that now checks what that signal is. So what we can do now is we can go to our tile that's in front of the door and go to scripting and assign our door check script to that tile. So let's just go into game and just check that it's working. So here we are in game. So if I move on to the tile, we get the door is closed, which is correct. And if I move away and back, the door is closed. Again, because the signal isn't changing, therefore the text isn't changing. But that's how you set up a signal and check what the signal is. So the third thing we need to cover, the final thing, is changing the signal. So for that, I'm going to select the door again, and I'm going to right click on the door, and I'm going to do this via a quick script, because it's just quicker for me to type things out than it is to use the Visual Script Editor. So let's talk about, actually, this is going to be now making the door work. So let's think about what we want to do. So we probably want to play animation. So if I find play animation in here and drag that in. So remember earlier how I said entity IDs are really important. and I'm just retyping it here. Play animation entity door 1. Remember how I said these are really important, okay? Now, I should mention that they're important for when you're putting scripts onto something that's not this object, okay? So this tile, for example, is completely separate to this door. And so because of that, this tile the script that's on this tile needs to know, if you're referring to a different object, what that object is called, which is why you use the ID of this object, door 1 in this case. So now this tile knows you're talking about this door. However, in this case, this is a different circumstance. I'm about to write a script that's going to go on the door itself. So do I need to type this out if this script is already going on the door? The answer is no. What you can do in this case is, instead of writing entity door 1, you can type self. And what this basically means is self is itself. So because this script is on the door, this means the door. So this will automatically be filled in as entity door 1. Okay, it's the equivalent of doing that, but it's just much easier, much quicker. But we can only do this because this script is actually going on the door. If we used self on the tile, self would be the tile, right? So that's why we can't do it there. Anyway, let's finish this play animation request. So we want to type open, and that would work. The moment we run this script, this door will open, which is great. There's just one problem, however. Every time we click on this door, it's going to play the open animation, even if it's already open. So we clearly don't want that. So this is where you have to start thinking about, how do I achieve what I want? I don't want the door to open again when it's already open. How do I do that? Well, think about the fact that what you've got on the door is you've got a signal, right? It's giving off an open false signal at the moment all the time. So you probably want to check the signal, right? And see what it is. And if it's open, then don't open it again, because it's already, if the signal is open, don't open it, right? So what we need to do is we need to do the exact same code that we put on our tile, but we need to put it on the door. So if self.property open is equal to false, which it will be to begin with, because that's what I've set the signal up to be to begin with, open false. So if that's the case, then we want to play animation self open, and that will open the door. Then we want to write else play animation if I can type, come on, play animation self close, and then we want to end. So this seems like it would work, but there's a problem, okay? This is going to do the exact same thing as we did with our tile earlier. It's just going to keep opening the door. Why? Because this signal is constantly emitting false over and over and over and over again. What we need to do is the third part of the 3-step process. We've got a signal, we're checking the signal, but we haven't yet changed the signal. That's important. We need to track the fact that the door has been opened. The animation is not going to do that for you. The game needs to be told that this door has changed state. And that's why you need to change the state. So underneath your play animation, we're going to type self.property open equals true. And now it's a different signal. Now it's not emitting false anymore. Now it's emitting a true signal, which means that when we then click the door again, when it gets to this line 1, it's going to read that and go, oh, that's not the case anymore because it's true. So it's going to then skip all of this and go straight down to line 4 and do this else instead, because if it's not that, then it must be this. And so it's going to now close, okay? But now we're going to have the opposite problem, because we're now going to have a door that every time you click on it, even if it's closed, it's going to close. And that's because now the signal is permanently open, true, open, true, open, true. So you guessed it, we need to update the signal again. Back to false. And now we have a loop. We have a starting signal that's false. And if that's the case, we open the door visually. And then we change the signal to reflect the fact that the door has been changed to open. So that the next time you click on it, it doesn't do this. It goes down to here instead, closes the door visually. And then we change the signal to reflect the fact that the door's gone back to being closed. And so the next time you click on it, this is valid again, so it does this again instead. It should be pointed out that an if statement only does one of the valid conditions. It doesn't do this and then immediately do this. If this is valid, it will do this and stop. If this is not valid, then it will do this and stop. And that's how you get a two-stage toggle, okay? So each time you click on the door, it's doing either one of these, whichever one is valid. If none of those are valid, for whatever reason, it's not going to do anything, okay? The only other thing I'm going to quickly add for my purposes is a replace navigation, because obviously a functioning door should allow me to walk through it when I've opened it. So let me just type this out. Okay, and there's our script that goes on our door. So let's just quickly test it, make sure the code works and everything, and then we'll recap what we've done, and then I'll talk about why it's so important to get your head round these 3 simple concepts. So here we are in game, so I'll just spin the camera around. So here's our door that's currently emitting a signal saying open, false, open, false, open, false. So if I step on the tile, that gets interpreted as the door is closed, because I've made that interpretation myself as the developer, okay? And every time I step on this tile, because the signal isn't changing, that's what it's going to constantly keep saying over and over again. But now I'll click on the door, which has a script on it as well, on the interacts event, which is also checking what the signal is. And if it's false, then it's going to both open the door but also change the signal to true. Well, it's done the first bit, it's opened the door. We can't immediately tell whether it's changed the state of the door signal or not. However, if I leave the tile and step back on it, it should tell us now that the door is open, which it does because the tile has now detected that the different signal means that it should show the other text. So our first if condition that we put on this tile is also updating as well, because they're both listening for the signal that's coming off of this door. And now that the door is open, when I next click on it, it's going to find that the signal is repeating open, true, so it should then do the else part of the if condition and close the door instead and set the signal back to being false, 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 false. And sure enough, I've just closed the door. I can no longer walk through the door. If I step off the tile and back on, I get the door is closed again. And there's our loop. So click, go in, door is open, go back, door is still open, close it, go back, door is closed. Okay? So we've made a functioning door, obviously very easy, but the point of this video wasn't to show you how to make a door, it was to use the door as an example to explain the very 3 basic principles that you really need to sort of understand for making any kind of game, really, is everything needs to emit some sort of signal, in this case a property, or it could be a global property, just as long as it's a signal somewhere that your game can reference. You then need a way of checking what that signal is and interpreting the signal. And then you need a way of changing or updating that signal. As long as you do those three things, anything you want to make in a game is doable. And it's the same three steps. So for example, let's say we add Sarah. I'm not going to actually do any of these. I'm not going to go through the process, but I'm going to explain to you the same thing. Let's say we wanted when Sarah dies on death script or something, we want a different map to load. Okay. So you'd think it through. You think, what do I want to achieve? I want when Sarah dies for a map to load. Okay, well, I need to track the state of Sarah then. Okay, so I need Sarah to emit a signal. So if I select Sarah, go down to her custom properties, I can set a signal up. Sarah dead, false, because she's currently not, right? So now I've got, because Sarah is emitting a signal, dead, false, dead, false, dead, false all the time, I can now check that with a script using the if entity Sarah dot property dead equals false, then that means she's alive, right? So I can give her an ID, Sarah1, check she's got a tag, and then I can write a script that has an if condition that's interpreting what that signal means. If it's this, then it means that, else it means this, right? And then you can say if it's true, i.e. if in this case dead is true, that's where you would have your load map in your script. So hopefully you can start to understand that this doesn't just apply to a door. This applies to everything. You need these three things. The thing itself to emit a signal that tells the engine the state that it's currently in and can be in. A way to check and interpret that signal, typically an if condition, if statement, and then a way to change or update that signal using either, dot property equals true or whatever, or using the set entity property node from here. Let me just find it. You can use this if you're using the Visual Script Editor. And then here is where you'd say the entity. So entity by ID door1, for example. And then you'd have the property name. So you would type, open. And then in this property value, in my case, I'd select Boolean. And if I wanted to set it to true or false, I'd set the one I want it to be true now. Click OK. And that's how you can set a signal, update it. But with those three things in place, you're pretty much good to go with this. This is like the cornerstone of programming. Yes, there's more to programming than just that, but very simply to get going making most games, most things can be done with a global property or an entity property. Because as long as you can track something and interpret what it means and change it, you can make games do most things with just that alone. And that usually tends to be most of the questions that a lot of beginners have with RPG in a Box. How do I do X thing? Or how do I make X thing do this? How do I check if I've completed a quest? How do I check if I've killed an enemy? How do I open a door? That kind of thing. It's usually the same answer. Make a global property or an entity property, have a script, check what it's set to, and also when it needs to be changed, don't forget to change the signal. If you do the three things I've covered in this video, rinse, repeat for your needs, you'll find that you're set. Okay. Now, I've shown you a very simple example in this particular video, which is just a two-state process. So open, closed, up or down, in or out, that kind of thing, true or false. In the next video, we'll continue looking at state management, but we'll take a look at when there's more choices open to you, such as strings, numbers, that kind of thing. But for now, hopefully you found this video useful and interesting, and it's given you a good starting point of giving you an idea of how to approach the idea that you're thinking of creating. Chances are it can be done with putting a signal on something. If there's nothing that the signal should go on, For example, trying to think of an example immediately off the top of my head. You just want to check a particular bit of data that's not necessarily tied to a specific object, then you'd use a global property. But it would be the same thing. You create a global property in the game configuration. That would be your signal. And then that would just be the game itself emitting a signal rather than a specific entity. And then your script, and then you'd write a script that checks what that signal is, interprets it, and then can update it. And then, you can make games track, change, and do these sorts of things. You'll find that most things in games are done by states, checking what something is and changing it. Anyway, as I say, that'll wrap this video up. Stay tuned for part 2.